Welcome. If you are new to this community, especially to students, we know that students might not have heard of us or might have just started the program, and we really wanted to center students in today's material and presentation. So warmest welcomes. Today, we are going to be recording the session just for educational purposes. Sometimes we are able to share the recordings. We often get requests to share the recordings, and those ones that have been previously done are available at the co-design at McMaster or .mcmaster.ca website. As Kathy noted, that you're welcome to join by video, but we understand that there's reasons that people might not be joining by video, and either is fine. If you like to have closed captioning, that's enabled on your screen. So just send us a note, maybe to Alexis, if you aren't sure how to get that working, but you'd like to get that working on your Zoom screen. People have already discovered the chat. Today, there will be interactive components where you're encouraged and welcome to communicate with us either and one another, either via the chat or by unmuting. But we'll let you know when those opportunities are. That said, if you have a burning question that you don't mind popping into the chat, but knowing that we might hold it till a bit later when there's a natural break, feel free to drop your comments and questions into the chat. We just wouldn't expect the presenters to be monitoring the chat while presenting. It's always a really challenging skill for anybody to multitask in that way. So there will be a short period for questions after each of the three presentations. If we don't have enough time for your question then, don't worry. There's going to be a longer period for dialogue, both in the breakout room activities and the large group discussion periods. Oh, and just if you aren't comfortable having your name showing, or you want to not have your last name, or you want to include your pronouns, you're able to rename yourself again in the Zoom settings. You just have to look for those three dots beside your name in the participant list, and it should allow you to do that. Okay. So as I say this, I realize that I'm not seeing the chat, but I trust that Alexis or Sandra will let me know if I need to pause. There's nothing in there right now. Our plan is to welcome you, to do a land acknowledgement, and then to flow right into the presentations. There will be three of them, with a tiny bit of question and answer after each one. And then we will move into, we'll check a couple of breakout rooms, depending on the number of people who join. And there will be some dialogue questions facilitated in those rooms by each of the presenters. We'll come back for some large group discussions and closing remarks. Okay. So our presenters for today are going to be Heather O'Grady presenting with Kathy Smith, and I'm going to provide a little bit more information about each of the presenters as we roll into those presentations. We're also going to have Shayla Jamal present and Ekam Gruel. Before we roll into the content, I'd like to acknowledge that McMaster University is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and the Haudenosaunee Nations, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. And as we do our land acknowledgements, and knowing that lots of people are joining virtually, you can reflect on the land from which you're joining. And if you're wondering what that is, if you go to native-land.ca, it will tell you a little bit more about the Indigenous peoples that were and maybe are present on the land in which you reside. But I did some reflecting about my office here in the Institute of Applied Health Sciences at McMaster University. We had a visioning day last night. It was about equity, diversity, inclusion, and Indigenous reconciliation. And it was a really powerful narrative-based exploratory conversation with some of the people who are leading work in this area in the Faculty of Health Sciences. And something that came out really strongly was about listening to the ancestors and learning from the ancestors and passing on knowledge through generations. And I thought about that with respect to student presentations today, or at least work that was done while as a student with our partners, and thinking about how people can enter a space as a new learner and with a lot of curiosity and exploration, and then develop that expertise by listening to people who have come before them. And now we're sharing that knowledge and expertise with other people who might also be new to this space as we all continue to learn together. So I'm going to stop my share there so I can see everybody a little bit better. And I'm going to give you a bit more bio about our first presenter, who is Ekam Grewal. And Ekam, if you want to share your slides as I'm doing your bio and introduction, please feel free.
Awesome, sounds good.
So Ekam is a second-year MSc student under the supervision of Dr. Rebecca Gewirtz here in the School of Rehabilitation Science. Her research focuses on understanding the intersecting identities of race and disability in the context of employment. Her goal is to untangle the complicated web of intersectionality and its impacts on employment outcomes for equity-deserving groups. She will share learnings from her research on intersecting identities, exploring the interplay of race and disability in the employment support systems. So with that, I'll turn it to you, Ekam.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Ekam, and like Michelle mentioned, I'm a second year rehab science master student, and today I have the awesome opportunity to present my findings from my qualitative study, which explores the interplay of race and disability in our current employment support systems. I would also love to acknowledge the unwavering support and guidance from my supervisory committee. I would also like to thank IDEA for providing a platform to do the type of research that I'm doing right now. I'd also like to thank SSHRC for funding this project and the Co-Design Hubs for allowing me to present here today. In terms of the layout of my presentation, I'll be briefly going over some background information, go over my methods, my main findings, connect it back to implications and next steps, and hopefully at the end we have some time for questions. So my work is associated with the Inclusive Design for Employment Access Social Innovation Laboratory, also known as IDEA. And IDEA basically identifies, develops, evaluates, and disseminates evidence-informed tools and resources through co-design with the help of our community partners that helps advance the fields of workplace capacity, as well as looks at job trajectories of persons with disabilities across a full range of employment opportunities. So IDEA is comprised of 5 incubator hubs, and my work actually falls under Incubator Hub 2 for employment support systems. And Hub 2 is co-led by Dr. Rebecca Gewirtz, who is my supervisor, and Francis Fung, who is the national manager at March of Dimes. And in this hub, we have 2 main objectives. Our first objective is to identify and evaluate approaches to employment support services that support employers as they hire and retain people with disabilities who experience significant workplace stigma, as well as explore the intersecting issues for disability, gender, and race in the context of employment support services. And a lot of my work has, a lot of my work is aligned with objective number 2. So the intersection of racism and ableism remains largely unexamined in workplace environments and the provision of employment supports. And these circumstances present a really unique opportunity to explore the types of employment supports from job preparation to retention that are available. So the overarching purpose of my qualitative study was to explore the intersecting nature of disability and race within employment support services and to address gaps that are faced by employers, service providers, racialized job seekers, and workers with disabilities to hopefully further improve employment opportunities and create more workforce equity. So my research is largely informed by the theoretical framework of intersectionality. So this intersectional approach can be applied to understand the experiences of those who identify with multiple social categorizations that can create an overlapping system of discrimination or disadvantage. This was originally introduced by Kimberly Crenshaw, and this framework basically reinforced that people who belong to multiple marginalized identities, their experience is a result of a complex individual and systemic factors that can't be attributed to a single form of a social identity. In terms of methods, my overarching research question was to understand the experiences of racialized job seekers and workers with disabilities, employers, and service providers as they navigate the employment support systems of Canada. In terms of my methodology, we did interpretive description. We conducted one-on-one semi-structured interviewing via Zoom, and when creating our interview questions, we held multiple meetings to help design instructions with the help of our community partners and organizations. Just to name a few, we connected with March of Dimes, Reachability, Young, Willing, and Able, and CASE. Our data was also collected via these community partners, and we collated our data on Deduce, and from there we performed a thematic analysis. So moving towards my main findings, in terms of participant characteristics, we had a total of 10 participants. 4 of them were service providers, 4 of them were workers, and 2 of them were employers. In terms of disability characteristics, we encountered a lot of people with epilepsy, diabetes, arthritis. In terms of categorized racial groups, we encountered people who were Black, South Asian, and white. So from our thematic analysis, we ended up with 5 core themes that arose from our participant data. So our first theme is actually a direct quote from one of our participants, and it's titled, "And having all of these intersections is confusing." And for each theme, I tried to include a quote that captures that theme. So we have a quote here from Michael who says, "I'm trying to figure it out. The problem with having so many intersections. I got epilepsy in my 20s. I was born with congenital hydrocephalus. I also have arthritis. I have a number of disabilities, and epilepsy is one of them. And having all these intersections, it's confusing. I don't know what it is." So this really refers to the impact of multiple intersecting identities and how it comes with its own sets of experiences and impressions. What we realized here is that an individual can be so complex and still be unsure as to what part of their being is creating these barriers to success, such as attaining sustainable employment. Our second theme is also a direct quote from a service provider, and it's titled, "Employers, my big thing is to educate." And we have a quote from Alex who said, "So employers, my big thing is to educate, kind of correct them on what they're talking about. Like I'll hear quite often, I guess somebody that's going to be employed for me will not be able to do the job, so I'm going to have to do the hand holding." So there's a lot of education involved with my job, a lot of networking, a lot of telling and working with people. Through that, having somebody that has a barrier for employment can be a great addition to a team. So employer education was a and it was constantly referred to. So education and training can really help employers and should be the first line of action to recognize and address the systemic barriers that can affect individuals with intersecting identities in gaining employment. Our third theme is contextual barriers, and this mainly includes issues of pigeonholing and stereotyping. Again, we have another quote from Alex who said, "Pigeonholing. So, for example, the group that I'm with, there's a lot of racial diversity amongst our group. So it's really nice, but you have a lot of people where, for example, the subway a couple of weeks ago, I hear, 'Oh man, those people are everywhere.' So there's a lot of that racism that's still there, and pigeonholing can bring everybody in one box." So another thing that we realize is that oftentimes society can create a lot of damage and assign certain characteristic traits, behaviors, and roles to individuals and groups. And this can cause a lot of communal misunderstandings and mistrust during the hiring process for equity deserving groups. Our fourth theme is about client service provider relationships. And here we have Aisha, who was a racialized service provider herself, and shares her experiences. She says, "The other thing that I've also noticed is that in a lot of spaces that I've been in, a lot of employment support providers are white. And I cannot necessarily speak to how that has influenced my clients' interactions with employment services or anything like that, but they're noticeably in that kind of environment. I certainly feel an awareness of the differences, and differences not in ideology, but in how I might support somebody in that kind of space. Like I said, I've had those conversations before with some clients. So here, what we encountered is that there's a need to create more diversity and a call for more personalized supports that cater to the individual that they're supporting, to create more stable and comfortable relationships between the client and service provider. Our last theme is also a direct quote, and we have a quote from Michael who said, "We are in a crisis right now. I don't need a solution years from now. I need a solution right now." Here, this quote was really emotive as well as powerful. And what we realize is that this issue is ongoing. However, no corrective solutions have been made that holds impact. Our participants are really asking for simple things, but in the real world can be really tough to acquire, such as more funding, more personnel, and better hiring practices. So moving towards implications, next steps, I'm trying to connect everything back at the end. Lastly, what we want to say is a study is the first step in acknowledgement. This field of work is very underrepresented in the publication world. So our first plan of action was to create a base in which readers can be informed that this problem exists. Our next phase towards co-creation, in which we can take these perspectives and experience we've attained to create something through a collaborative effort that meets their collective needs and goals. So for our next steps, we realized that we need to create individual supports that cater to the needs of job seekers and workers with multiple intersecting identities. In our checklist, we have at number one is to create collaboration-focused partnerships, such as IDEA, which we've done, investigate research gaps, which we've been doing and will be ongoing. And our next phase is to co-design solutions through an iterative process in which our main end users, who are racialized job seekers, workers with disabilities, are actively building a resource base and learning materials to share among service providers and employers. We also want to co-design policies and governance frameworks that are more responsive, transparent, and accountable, and reflect the diverse interests and values of racialized job seekers and workers with disabilities through collaborative brainstorming, problem solving, and scenario building exercise to address the concerns that we've covered through this work today. Co-designing policy requires time, resources, commitment from all the users involved. However, we hope to create more inclusive, equitable, and effective policy outcomes that better address the complex challenges that are facing society as of right now. That was it. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll end my screen sharing now.
Amazing work, Ecom. Thank you so much for sharing and for going first. I know that that can be the hardest position sometimes to go in, and what a wonderful introduction to the world of co-design, especially with equity deserving groups.
Thank
I'm
you.
wondering if there's anybody who wants to share a comment or question. We have time for a couple before we move on to the next presentation. I can ask one that struck me as people are thinking or maybe typing. I noticed in your themes and your quotes, Ecom, that people tended to speak to either race or disability. And I wondered, as you were doing interviews, did people talk about those aspects of self and their experiences separately, or were they more often combined?
No, that's such an awesome point that you raised because a lot of the times they were talked at like separate sort of problems and not problems that can be together and compounded. And that's like one of our main motivators for doing this study is that we realize that oftentimes we sector ourselves. So we have, people with disabilities, we have people who are immigrants, we have people who are racialized, but we don't tend to see the combined impact that can create with all of those identities. And I think it'll take some time, but I hopefully with these interviews, I kind of started, letting the participants sort of, brainstorming and thinking about how these um, problems can really come together. And I think what we realize is that at the end of the interviews, when we're kind of concluding, they started talking about race and disability together and sort of providing more of their insights of what we can do and further recommendations. So I think it's still in the early stages. I think there's a lot of work to be done to change the ideologies of a lot of people. But thank you for raising that point. That's basically our motivator for doing this entire study, where people think that they're separate problems and they should be dealt separately.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Sandra?
And yeah, question. So I'm excited about kind of where you're going from here as well, right? In terms of the co-creation process. And do you have some thoughts about how to do that and who needs to be at the table? I know that's something we often talk about is how do you get the voices that maybe aren't as heard as often? And do you have some thoughts around how to do that?
Yeah, that sounds great. I think coming from my work with IDEA, I think IDEA did a lot of work in terms of bringing everyone on a table because it's such a diverse interdisciplinary team. So I think our next phase is to work with those people on the table and to work with the people that have already worked now, here are community partners, because we are affiliated with so many advocacy groups and as well as organizations who support people with disabilities in terms of employment. So I think, and we're connected with a lot of people in the government as well who are trying to take more action oriented steps in towards like creating policy and stuff like that. So I think our next phase is that we've actually gotten a lot of traction from service providers themselves who want us to come there and sort of, give them a lay down of what we've uncovered and sort of speak to them, speak to their network of providers, as well as from there, they can sort of be like knowledge users to sort of transfer that knowledge to their own clients as well as employers that they work with. So I think the large part of our work in terms of bringing everyone on the table, I think Ideas has done a really good job of doing that. So I think our next step is sort of um, going to different people and trying to just put our work out there.
Amazing. I think we're excited to see where it goes. Um, so if I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, so maybe I'll move us along to our second presentation. I'll just do a brief bio and introduction for you, Shyla, but if you wanted to share your slides in the meantime, then we'll be ready to roll. So Dr. Shyla Jamal is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto, Scarborough. She specializes in suburban mobility and equity in transportation, holding a PhD from McMaster University. Currently, she explores co-design strategies for engaging marginalized communities in Hamilton using both quantitative and qualitative research methods. She'll share learnings from her research on co-design for improving transit services for older immigrants, challenges, lessons, and a way forward. And Shyla, we're seeing your notes version. Did you want to try presenter view?
Yeah, just 1 minute. Sorry, I was mute and I was just trying. Okay.
That's right. Just click slideshow. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you everyone for attending this session. So my co-design project for which I received the co-design seed grant was a co-design for improving transit services for older immigrants. So in this presentation, I'm just going to share the challenges, lessons I learned, and the way forward I have. So, and in this project, I conducted this project when I was a PhD student at McMaster, and it was supervised by my PhD supervisor, Dr. Bruce Newbold, and he is also a co-investigator in this project. So the project we did, it was the main target. Our main target was to develop and implement a co-design framework that will actually suggest some transit service improvement plan for the older immigrants. And for that, we decided to sit with the older immigrant people, transit service providers, and also the different agencies who work with the older immigrants to identify the transportation related challenges and barriers this older immigrant group face, and how we can improve, or let's say how transit can actually support them in removing or addressing those barriers. So yes, we started with a really big goal, but it was not, we know that might not be able to solve all the problems that older immigrants are facing, or maybe it may not be address all the challenges they are facing, but it was like, okay, maybe at least this project will give some opportunity, because we are trying to engage all the service providers and the older immigrants. So at least this will give them to learn about and reflect upon the challenges these older immigrants people are facing in related to the transportation. And when we received the seed grant, this one actually helped us to cover some expenses of the remuneration we gave to our interviewees. And also we were able to hire a research assistant who helped us in terms of transcription and recruitment of the interviews. So the project, I am not going to talk about the framework we developed, the methodology we developed. We followed two procedure. One was the double diamond design approach, and another one equity-based co-design approach. But basically it talks about, at least at first, discover, like just go through this 4 steps, like it talks about discover and defining the problem, and then developing a solution and implementing it. So for us, when we are talking about the older immigrants, these people actually are facing, we will say, double vulnerability. One is because of the aging, and another one is because of their immigration status. So what we think that maybe with the co-design, when we are talking about, okay, let's make these people sit together on the same table, sometimes we feel that it might not work properly, just like we just went to the immigrant and invite them to the table with the service provider or the city people, municipal people, or transit service provider. So what we try to did is, okay, before the co-design step, let's have some interviews. So we recruited older immigrants and we talked about them and tried to define the problem, or what are the barriers and challenges they face. And then we think, okay, the next steps will be, okay, start a co-design process, make these people sit together, discuss, and what could be the possible solution can be. So that's how we started. And so we started with the interviews, but before that, obviously, when you are working with the community, you need partners. It's really difficult to go to a community and recruit people. So we collaborated with different project partners. One of them was Hamilton Street Railway, or the transit service provider here, Hamilton Immigration Partnership. We also had a partnership with the Social Planning and Research Council of Hamilton, and we also involved 2 older immigrants who are actively involved in the immigrant community. And through this partner, we identified more partners by whom we actually recruited our participants. So it involves Wesley Hispanic Association of Hamilton, Afro-Canadian Caribbean Association of Hamilton, South Asian Heritage Association. So different project partners were involved in this project. So for our semi-structured interview, it was a really hard process, but we were able to recruit 54 older immigrants in 2022. And so as we are looking into a more vulnerable or hard to reach population, our older immigrant groups also are from the low income household. We targeted who are from the low income household and also belongs to a visible minority group. And also, as this is about their transit, because we try to help them through the transit service. So we decided to recruit only participants who are living within the urban areas of Hamilton. And we have people from different ethnic origins like Afro-Caribbean, we have Arab people, we have people from Chinese origin, Latin American origin, and also from South Asia. And another thing is out of 54 participants, or 48 participants were non-English speakers. So we actually had to hire translators for them. They were speaking different languages. So language barriers was one of the challenges we had. So after that recruiting, identifying the problems, defining, we actually did few co-design workshop, but unfortunately still the thing we are thinking that these two groups are quite different. Our service provider and our user groups are different. And due to some protocol issues even, we actually couldn't make them sit together. So this is one of the co-design workshop we had with our service providers. Yes, we showed them our interview findings. There was no older immigrant or user group here. It's all mostly the service provider, HSR, City of Hamilton people, HIPSI, people from HIPSI who joined. So that was one co-design workshop we had with them, and we are talking about how the challenges they face can be solved. And then we actually had few co-design workshop with our older immigrant participants. But actually that time we also, like how the co-design was going, it actually ended up as a focus group discussion. We won't say that with our older immigrant, the plan we had, it actually, we won't say that the process actually followed a co-design kind of steps. It's become ultimately a focus group discussion. And these are the challenges we faced. So there are some other challenges we also had. Like one of the thing is we found it really hard. There are people from Co-Design Hub. People knows when I started this project, it was so much challenge in terms of, Allison helped a lot. It was so much challenges in terms of recruiting, especially when we started with the social media. It was the really bad decision we took because we got so much fake responses and then scrutinizing them. That was a really difficult experience we had. So, and also like our target group, it was not a wise decision, we will say, because our target group was mostly the people who does not speak English. So social media recruitment actually was not a good strategy for us. And also these people are low income, aging people from a visible minority background. So yes, this is the challenge we had with the recruitment, but thanks to our partners, through them, we were able to hire almost 54 older immigrants. And then when we started with the the co-design, we saw that our participants, especially the older immigrants, they don't have the enough experience with the co-design methodology and public participation. So that's why it's ended up as a focus group discussion, the co-design workshop we tried to help with them. And then, yes, this is the one. And also what we were thinking about, how could we mitigate the tokenism? It's not like a check marks. Okay, I have to do some interviews with the equity deserving group. I have to make some people from those visible minority group to attend my workshop, and that's it. It's not like that. We really want to hear their problems and address them. So it was a challenge. We are thinking that how could we mitigate the tokenism? And also sometimes there are some people who participate very actively, and there are some participants who are just came and then don't engage a lot. So these are the things, and also about this, how we can ensure a safe and inclusive place. And that's why what we held all our workshop and everything on a public libraries, not on the university complex, because sometimes people are not comfortable in coming here. Also for the language barrier, we had to recruit translators, and we also tried to hire translators who are from their own community actually, and the person whom they know. And also we try to avoid the clash of values between the users and service providers. And that's why one of the thing actually, even though with the municipal protocols and everything, we were not able to bring our older immigrants to the co-design table, but yes, also we also was thinking, okay, maybe that would be a good idea. It's better we have them separately. That's from our experiences we had. And we also had some resource and time constraints uh, to execute this project. And it takes a lot of time. That's it. Do I have more time? Sorry for asking. Or
Maybe a minute or two, Shyla, before there's a question or two.
Okay, yeah. So there are some lessons we learned. So yes, one of the thing is applying the co-design directly. We had some challenges, and that's the reason we have conducted the interview first to make the older immigrants more comfortable with us. And and also maybe we thought, okay, maybe if in the co-design process, if they keep silent because in the large group they might not speak. So maybe a one-to-one communication will make them more comfortable and share more experiences. And in terms of recruitment, as I say, we reach out to the community connections and organizations, and they helped us a lot. And for the interview, for focus group, we always, even the co-design workshop, we had separate communication strategy because that's our learning, how we communicate with the service provider, how we communicate with the municipal authority, and how we communicate with our older immigrants or the community. That's a different strategy, not the one strategy owned or the one language. There is some language, choice of language. So this should be different. And of course, it's a very iterative process, continuous connection making, updates, follow up, and making a balance between partners, participants. It was a very long, thorough process, and it's a really iterative process, of course. And about the incentives, sometimes we hear that, okay, some people just come for the incentives, they don't share that much. And I think that we have to accept it and be compassionate about it because our participants are actually from the low income group for a very disadvantaged group. And yes, some people will maybe won't share the information that much. And also there is a reason we do a lot of project, but they don't see any output or actually improving their thing. So their emotion is also valid, I will say. So some people are really, that's why reluctant to, provide detailed answer. So that's something we have to accept it. So, and for us, we think we didn't do more on the steps or strategies for the workshops or better engagement. So that's something we will explore more. That's another thing. And we will keep exploring more props and tools that we can use in terms of engaging the older adults in the co-design workshops. So that's it. And for this project, we already published a paper on the methodology we developed. I haven't talked more about the methodology, but we already published it. We presented the findings in different national and international conferences. And we are currently working on a reflective piece on the learning we had in this entire process. So hopefully that will be published soon. And we are still working on the analysis. And yes, and we made some collaboration with different universities. And yes, and this is still a continuing process. I'm very sorry that I had that time. So yeah, thank you so much. And I'm acknowledging the project partners, the funders, and especially the community partners we had. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And no apologies needed. It was really helpful to hear all about the challenges. And thank you for sharing that with so much vulnerability and transparency, because how co-design looks on paper versus how it happens in the real world can be so wildly different from one another. So it's really helpful to hear about your lessons learned. I want to make sure we have enough time for all of the presentations. So if there are any questions, maybe just feel free to pop it in the chat or to let me know. But otherwise, we might save it for our large group discussion at the end. I didn't see any popping up.
I just want to say we've been wanting for a long time to talk about when it's messy, right? And it's not perfect and some of the challenges, and really, really helpful, I think, to hear some of the very practical, I think, challenges of doing this work. So thanks, Shayla, for that. Oh, here we go from Jenna.
You have a related question. I don't know if you can see the chat, but I'll read it out loud in case people can't. It's from Jenna saying, if you were going to do the project all over again, what would you do differently? And just acknowledging great presentation.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Jenna. For me, I think I should have prepared more for the co-design workshops, and I should have prepared, like, yes, one of the thing, I am never going to recruit through social media when my participant group or target group is older immigrants, older people, or the immigrant people. So one of the thing in terms of recruitment. And another thing with the co-design workshop, we thought like, and I would invest more time, especially in designing the co-design workshop for different people and how exploring how different tools and props work. Because for us, we invested more time on the interviewing, because at the beginning, it was been almost 6 or 7 months. I was not getting any participants. Then, okay, in entire 2022, I was recruiting, and then it's the time for closing the project. So we were so rushed in terms of conducting the co-design. So yeah, that's something I will do really differently and explore more strategies, more other things, like how I can involve these people, or maybe try again to make the both user and service provider groups together to sit together and discuss. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the question, Jenna. So I am going to move us along to our third presentation today. We have Dr. Heather O'Grady, who completed her PhD in Rehabilitation Science at McMaster University, and her family partner, Kathy Smith, who are both going to be talking about their lessons from working on co-designing and pilot testing an infographic to support patients and families through the research consent process. And sharing their lessons learned.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Just confirming you can see the slides okay? Yeah, I can see notes. Okay, awesome. So good morning, everyone. As Michelle said, my name is Heather O'Grady. I'm very excited to be here today alongside Kathy to share some of the work we've done over the past few years to support patients and families through the research consent process in critical care. And then lastly, I'd just like to thank everyone at the Hub for your organization and for inviting us to be here with you today. So first, I'd just like to take a quick minute to set the stage for you and introduce you to the context in which Kathy and I do our work. So our work involves a very fundamental aspect of clinical research, which is informed consent. Informed consent, as I'm sure many of us know, is very critical to the conduct of any research and requires a clear communication of a trial, its risks, benefits, treatments, and alternatives. Communication for research consent can be challenging in any context, but particularly in environments such as the intensive care unit. In the intensive care unit, or the ICU, patients are typically very sick, treatments are time sensitive, and you're often speaking with patients and or their families and loved ones to consent on their behalf to research. These complexities are even further complicated when you have complex research designs, such as the trial where Kathy and I work, which is called REMAP-CAP. So I won't get into all of the complexities of REMAP-CAP, but very briefly, for this study, patients may receive one of many different treatments, all of which need to be communicated during research consent. So the time sensitivity, the stressful environments of the ICU, and then the complexities of some of these research designs that occur in this setting can make research consent a challenge, particularly in communication for patients and their families to understand what it is that they're choosing to participate or not participate in. So that's setting the foundation for our work. And now I'll hand things over to Kathy to talk a little bit more about the history of our team and our project.
Thank you, Heather, and good morning, everyone. My name is Kathy Smith, and I'm actually a co-designer on the project, and that comes as a patient partner. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to share some lessons learned as a patient engaged in research. There were only two partners willing to take on the challenge, Sandra Dalzell and I, and that's because our very seasoned and very comfortable principal investigators, John Marshall and Srinivas Murthy from two different coasts, Prince Edward Island and Victoria or Vancouver Island, they basically said to the patients, just do it. They gave us the reins and said, figure out what the problem is based on your lived experience, figure out what the process is going to be. In other words, what is it that you want us to study? So although patients engaged in research can and are integrated anywhere, anyway, for any length of time, anywhere along the research continuum, I don't think I had ever encountered an experience where we were the ones that were designing the question. Can I have that first slide, Heather? Thank you. If you look at this design right here, this came from, I was a health sciences professor when I wore a different hat. This was at Confederation College in Thunder Bay. And this was our logo, Dream, Do. Our own study fit into this very nicely, where on the first part, the dreaming part, that was where the patient partners took the lead. We were deliberating, defining, and detailing a prototype for the study. And then when Heather took over, it was the do part of the study, and that's where she designed the pilot study and delivered the survey in different areas. She's going to talk to that in a minute. What I wanted to say is that we did address diversity. We had, certainly you can see by my hair, I'm on the other side of the coin. So we had the young, we had the old, we had geographical diversity. We did not have Indigenous representation, although I feel that's my job to bring, as a honeybee, take the honey and bring it back to the workers and the different community groups that can benefit from that. It would be nice to have more diversity always. And when I'm just going to carry on, because we did bring this out to a larger group and we did get more diversity actually. So in the research field, although I was amazed that we were able to take the lead. Why shouldn't patients take the lead? They have the lived experience, which matches the other types of experience and learning that's out there. The traditional staid and stolid, singular and secretive, siloed ivory tower health research environment has transformed. It's a multi-stakeholder collaborative partnership with the 4 key stakeholder groups asked to be represented, often by the research funders. Actually, the funding is contingent upon co-designing health research studies mostly these days. So you need a well-rounded team of lived, the ones with the lived experience, the loved, those are the ones caring for the ones with lived experience, the learned, those are the ones with the academic expertise, and the laborers, the clinicians and the research coordinators, and all of the different parts of these 4 L's, as I call them, need to be present at the table in a co-design type of research study. What we did, and I'm going to very quickly shorten this up, we passed around as a group many different research ideas. We looked at soft things like, why aren't there clocks to let a person that may be at the brink of delirium in ICU, why don't they know what time it is? That was the first thing that my husband always asked, what day is it? What time is it? Because he lost that grounding, stoned on different painkillers and, you know, life hanging in the balance. You lose sight of things that ground you and keep you focused. So we looked at the soft ones, but we kept going back to consent. And both of us had experienced quickie consents, which are less than ideal. And then we had very strong and completely supportive time and ability to consent to a trial. That is not the case in ICU for either of our experiences. So we knew something had to be done. And Heather, can you put up the second slide, please? Although I'm jumping over. Nope. The one that's mine.
Oh,
Mr.
yeah,
Seuss.
There we go.
That one there. When we come to the table as these 4 different types of learners, we bring many hats. And what I wanted to say is, although we were bandishing about many ideas to decide on a research study, we needed to see, well, what are we bringing to the table? What do we have in common? And what can we use from all of those hats to create something that will be impactful and relevant to the patients? So when this study was designed for patients by patients, I think we had an edge. In one way, it took a little more time to get to know each other, but in the other way, we zeroed right in on what was the most important impact. What we really struggled with in this dream part was to basically come to gathering all the different languages and jargons that we have, whether we're wearing hats as a book smart person, a street smart person, a patient smart person. We had to develop a common lexicon from all of those different languages. But once we did, we could then sail ahead great guns and get into Heather's part. Our biggest problem was, as you could see from our title, what do you mean by REMAP CAP, randomized, embedded, multifactorial, adaptive platform trial in community-acquired pneumonia? And I'm the one that's asking all the time, what is this? What are you talking about? Even CAPTIC, Canadian Adaptive Platform Trials in Intensive Care. So learning all those acronyms and what they mean, and what do you mean by embedded? What do you mean by platform? Well, how is a platform trial different than a clinical trial? What do you mean by real lived experience? All of that had to be understood first, but understanding that it took us months to get to that point, that's when I put the teacher hat on and thought, okay, we need an audiovisual aid. We need something that's going to condense this down into plain language, simplify the 30-page document down to maybe 3 paragraphs. And that was the next stage of the work, was to work and develop a co-pilot or at least a prototype for the co-pilot. And it was at that point we had a call out on social media and gathered up some other patient voices, but also the research coordinator voices were in there as well, and the clinical voices. So we put them all into one group. We hired a graphics specialist to work with that, and we stayed back. We did not enter into that group because we wanted to hear different voices, diverse voices from wherever. We had a nuclear engineer from New Brunswick. We had someone that was a physiotherapist from Montreal. We had a pharmacist from Calgary, and all of that blended in to say, this is how the infographic should look. So at this point, I'm turning it over to Heather and turning our project from the dream stage to the do stage.
Thank you, Kathy. So as Kathy beautifully set the stage, I was very lucky to walk into a team who had this wonderful idea, but needed a little, I think, person power to help support and make the research side of it happen and have some dedicated time for that. So I won't go into the methods of our project in too much detail, but very briefly just wanted to highlight that we developed and conducted a two-phase mixed method study. We're very grateful that this work was supported by one of the Co-Design Hub's seed grants and helped support the work that we did for this. But very briefly, the objective of the first phase, which was qualitative, was to develop an infographic to help support communication during research consent for this very complicated and complex trial. And the objective of our second phase was to take that infographic and pilot it in real consent encounters. And we ended up doing that over a period of a year. So I'm very excited to say that this work, this pilot work is done. You'll see in the top right corner is our protocol for the study, which is published. We just submitted an abstract with our results, and hopefully a manuscript will be out by the summer with the results of that. So if you're interested in the results of the work, we'd be happy to share that offline. We'll get into our lessons learned, though, for the last couple of minutes here. But before we did that, I just wanted to share, I know this is a very high-level kind of screenshot of the tool that we ended up developing. But this is our infographic. So essentially what we did is we condensed the 30-page consent document that Kathy referred to into what patients, families, and research coordinators felt was important. And we developed this two-sided page that we then gave to patients and families during consent discussions to help support communication between themselves and their care providers. And I'll now hand it back over to Kathy to share some final reflections.
Thanks, Heather. I'll be really quick. I'm mindful of the time here. The most important thing you can do, either as a patient partner engaged in research or any one of the 4 L's, is know yourself and know what you're bringing to the table. Be your authentic self. Don't try to be something that you're not. I worked in aquatic toxicology research for 10 years. I could have put a hat on as a patient. I've also had experience in intensive care in that setting. But the hat that suited this was basically the teaching hat. So know what you can bring to the table and be authentic. Know that it's valuable, whatever you're bringing to the table. Next slide, please. In an interdisciplinary collaboration, I think the main lesson to learn there is that we have a respectful, equitable platform. And that's what I meant about developing it, understanding each other. Take the time to do that, to join forces and engage in patient research. Next slide. Your critical thinking and creativity meshed with lived experience, it'll move us beyond the traditional ways of thinking about research and conducting research. And last slide. I know I'm jumping, but I want to be okay. That's it for me. Heather, you go ahead and take over.
And I just wanted to share 4 of my biggest, I mean, I've learned a lot along the way, but 4 of my biggest lessons learned, particularly from a student perspective. The first is that I think I've heard this across the presentations today, but co-design takes time. I find that everything takes a little bit longer. There's more individuals involved with different schedules and takes time to explain to people as well, like funders and research ethics boards. So I would just advise to give yourself lots of time for your activities and to try to be kind to yourself when things take longer than expected, which for me, from a student perspective, was a really big challenge, especially when you're constantly up against deadlines and different timelines. The second thing that was very uncomfortable for me as well at times is that the processes for co-design are iterative, and that's okay. And often it makes the product that much better at the end. But again, getting used to that uncomfortability, I had mostly quantitative research experience. So I was used to a set plan and we're going to follow it. That's not co-design, at least in my experience. So to be comfortable with that iterative process, and quite often it'll create a better product. As Kathy mentioned, relationship building is very critical. So I joined this team and help support an idea that was not mine. So from my perspective, it was really making sure that everyone at the table respected and trusted each other to help support in the different areas that were our strengths, as Kathy shared with our different hats. And then lastly, I've said this so many times to different individuals, but Although it can be challenging and it might take a lot of time, the experiences and products from co-design truly are invaluable. And I think it at the end makes products, whatever they might be, that are ultimately usable and impactful to those who will be using them. So with that, I'd like to thank you all again for attending and for the opportunity to share our experiences.
What a way to wrap us up. Thank you so much, Kathy and Heather. There were some questions coming up in the chat about the fourth L in the four learners. Kathy, I've never heard that before and I love it. I don't know if that was your idea or if it came from someone. Were the four L's lived, loved, learned, and labored?
Yes, they were. And this is not my idea. I need to give credit to Lexi McNally, and she is with the Diabetes Action Canada group. I do podcasts with another researcher, and that was one of the groups that we featured. And I really love those four L's. I actually think there should be the fifth, and that's the leaders, because research pivots on funding. And if you don't have the leaders present at these tables, there's a missed opportunity. There's a disconnect, and it's difficult for them to appreciate, as Heather has said and I've said, it takes a patience of time to do it right. And they don't fund you for that time, and they don't fund you for the person, the navigator, to make it happen in an easy way. It falls onto the overburdened researcher's shoulder. And usually, you know what goes downhill. So it's the young researcher, where I was for the 10 years. And those are difficult tasks to handle. There's all kinds of personalities you've got to blend.
Really are. I'm wondering if there's anybody else who has a question for either Heather or Kathy, or a comment. If not,
Sorry, I just posted an article on the four L's that I had read for your reference.
Oh,
thank you
good.
very much.
Okay.
As people are thinking or typing, we had a plan to move into breakout rooms, but we've had some people who had to hop offline and we're a little over where we thought we might be for time. So I'm going to make the call to keep us together as a large group. I will still share our discussion questions, and hopefully people feel comfortable to have some dialogue in the large group with us. I'll put these in the chat in just a second, but just so that they're nice and easy for everybody to see. We're really curious about who joins these sessions and about all the different ways in which people are doing co-design, co-production, co-creation, participatory forms of research. We're really not fussed about the language, but if you are doing sort of a community engaged type of project, we would love to hear a little bit about what you're doing and sort of who you're doing your work with. So that's question one. I'm going to put these down, but I'll just go through them first altogether. If people are willing to share a little bit about their work, we would love to hear it, including, as our presenters modeled so nicely, any challenges. This work is fraught, in my experience, I think, with challenges. So we're curious about whether you've experienced any challenges and how those might compare to what you heard from the presentations today. And lastly, our presenters again gave us some really nice lesson learned to reflect on, including what might you do differently if you were going to do this again. I like that question that came up in the chat earlier. So if there are things that you've learned on account of some of the challenges you've experienced or the successes that you've experienced, we would love to hear that. So in the interest of time, please feel free to tell us a little bit about your project and to reflect on the challenges or the recommendations that you might share. And I can put those questions into the chat as well, but I'm seeing a new message. Oh, just a thank you for our presenters. Anybody else on the line who wants to share a little bit about their experience? Yeah, Serena.
Hi, my name's Serena Eisenberg. I'm a health services researcher based in Ottawa, but living in Hamilton. And I do work largely around palliative and end-of-life care, and have increasingly been using co-design methods in my research. And so over the last few years, one of my studies was using co-design with patients and caregivers to design an intervention to improve the hospital to home transition at end of life. And so we were trying to find individuals who had transitioned from 2 hospitals in Ottawa to the community. It was very challenging to get a diverse sample of patients and caregivers. And the thing we found was that most of our participants were white, high socioeconomic status, retired with the time to participate in these sessions during the workday. And so we try to employ a bunch of methods to try and reach out to more diverse populations. A challenge we had is that our team only had members who could communicate in English or French, and a lot of the communities we wanted to reach had other languages as their primary language. And then also it's just like we can provide compensation. We were offering quite generous compensation, I think at $100 an hour, but ultimately we can't offset or backfill someone's time in their jobs. So that was really a challenge. And one thing we did to mitigate, which I didn't hear in the presentations today, was we involved healthcare providers in co-design sessions who serviced marginalized communities and asked them to speak to the experiences of those in these marginalized communities. Now, of course, that is, not ideal. You want to hear from the individual who has that lived experience, but that was our way of approximating it. So that's just a bit of what we've experienced in palliative care recruitment.
Thank you, Serena, for sharing both the challenge, but how you were creative in trying to overcome that challenge. I'm wondering, Shayla, you did a phenomenal job at recruiting people from what is often seen as a very hard to reach population. Do you have any advice for how you were able to do that?
Of course, thanks to the community partners, because I single-handedly only able to hire 4 people. So almost 50 of my people came from the social workers who supported me from the Wesley, YWCA, and also 2 ethnic organizations, Hispanic Association of Hamilton and Afro-Caribbean Association. So they actually helped me a lot in terms of reaching to those people. And also they supported me from their volunteer in terms of interpreters interpreters. So yeah, they supported a lot.
Yeah, those partnerships are so important.
Yeah, I tried to reach to other groups, but it was not successful. But yeah, there are few people whom I recruited from the community partners. I'm so grateful to them. So, and also what Serena just mentioned in terms of the people who work with these communities, like the disadvantaged communities, that was one of the component on my project, like also interviewing service providers. But due to time constraint, I was only able to interview 4 service providers. But yes, their perspective is really more detailed, because another thing I experienced that maybe there are few things that maybe the older immigrants have shared, but that also lost in the translation, what I say. That because my interpreter was translating, and maybe because it's really, I am not paying them a really high remuneration. It's just a token of appreciation. And let's say, maybe my older immigrants, I can hear, I don't understand them, but maybe they're saying almost, let's say, very 4 or 5 minutes narrative, but it's my translator is really giving me a short glimpse within 1 minute. So I think a lot of things lost in translation. But when I was interviewing the service providers, we don't have the language barrier. So they gave me a really detailed perspective, or maybe from their especially like rather than the challenges, the service providers who are working with them, they are more was like, okay, that's how you can solve it. If you can give it this way, but that something didn't came from the users. They're just, okay, these are the challenges, and maybe with their lack of experience with the system, they can't actually, tell the solution. But that's really coming from the service provider. But due to time constraint, and also I couldn't find but many people who really come and share their thoughts. But yes, that's an important thing what Sarina just mentioned, that the people who works with this community, they have a different perspective also.
So helpful to know and to hear about the use of interpreters as well. I'm wondering if anybody else has worked with interpreters or translators in doing their community engaged research. Yeah, Alexis.
Yes, I have, and it's particularly in some of my work in the international context at some events, specifically to do some human rights training with people with disabilities from so-called underrepresented groups, so including people with deafblindness, people labeled with intellectual disabilities and mental health issues and so on, who speak different languages. And so it's been really fascinating to see how this works. And I don't know if I would call it research per se, but it was more so around co-designing advocacy strategies and how to advance human rights, provide education to people who don't often see themselves as citizens. And so the rooms would be set up in such a way that there would be a booth at the back with multiple language interpreters, and then there would be people doing tactile interpretation and sign language interpretation at the same time as having illustrators in the room to visualize the complex concepts and ideas that we were talking about. And it was a really beautiful thing to watch, and it helped slow everybody down in the way that they were communicating and talking. But these events would cost like $100,000 to do because of the cost of interpreters, because of the cost of accommodations and adaptations, and the amount of time that was required to cover all of the material and give people the space to say, we need to pause for a minute, we need to allow interpreters to catch up, we need to take breaks, and so on. And so that's been an ongoing challenge to justify and rationalize for years the need for that kind of support, because the English language is just so incredibly dominant that we almost take it for granted to how exclusive it is. But I think it's a beautiful thing when you can do it. It's expensive because it's about providing accommodation and accessibility.
Yeah. Thanks, Alexis. It is expensive. It's also time consuming. So we're just doing French language translation on a co-design project right now, but like Heather said, it's iterative. So you can't really provide all the materials in advance because you learn from phase 1 what comes into phase 2, and you learn in phase 2 what comes into phase 3. So we need to leave enough time between those phases to allow us to analyze the material, then translate everything that's going to be coming into the next phase. And that's been transparently, it's been a steep learning curve for me, that it takes way more time, like double the amount of time than it would if we were solely doing it in English.
Yeah, and also if you do it by word translation, which I didn't have that luxury, but it's really expensive. So
yeah, exactly. Oh, Kathy, I'll come to you, and then I see your hand, Alexis.
I couldn't find the hand.
That's okay. Oh, go ahead, Kathy.
Oh, I just wanted to say that here in Northern Ontario, we've got 69 remote communities. We are very interested in collaborating with our Indigenous partners, and in doing other projects, what I've learned is there is a process for reaching them and getting their voices. And you must go through their elders. You must bring a gift respectfully. You must speak to the elders first. You hand them the problem or the question that you have, and they take it from there. So as far as the interpretation, as far as the comfort zone, you basically co-lead with them. They are much more mindful of any kind of cultural needs or cultural concerns, and then they will bring that information back to you. So learning that process, respectfully collaborating with them has become a lot easier. Another really good resource in the health field, at least, is with the nurse practitioners that work in those remote reserves, because they're there, they're observing, they're understanding. And a third is, at least at the different hubs, the larger little towns that we have Indian friendship centers. And it's very easy to say, oh, by the way, you know, let's have a cup of coffee and talk about. So those are ways that you can respectfully and, mindfully collaborate with our Indigenous partners.
Thank you. It's really helpful to think about these intermediary people who might be a service provider or a member of that community who can help to facilitate those relationship buildings and bring, I loved your honeybee earlier, Kathy, bring that information back to community. Alexis, did you have a comment you still wanted to add?
Yeah, I just actually a question for all of the presenters, if maybe you could just share within like a minute. One question that we've got quite a bit from folks interested in engaging in equity-based co-creation and co-design is from the community's perspective, whether that's a service providing organization in the healthcare or social service sector, or folks doing activism, is what are they going to get out of it? What's the benefit to them? Because there is this very realistic and uncomfortable power dynamic between academics and non-academics in terms of access to funding and that kind of thing. So I'm curious, from each of your perspectives, what did the communities and the partners get out of your project, and what were some of the things that they said was a benefit to them?
I can go first, but then I feel like I should just hand it over to Kathy to share from her perspective. But something that's really unique about our project, and I've tried to kind of disentangle, is that we had what I perceive to be a co-design study team, because we had very diverse stakeholders. So all the images, we had PIs for our trial, we had a lead research coordinator, we had patient family partners, myself as a student researcher. So it was very diverse. And I feel like we co-designed our project, but then we also had the layer of the co-designing our actual infographic tool. So I think that there was kind of like two layers of engagement there, and maybe different perceived benefits from both. But I definitely think from, if we focus more so like on the designing the infographic piece, from my perspective, what I heard to be the benefit is trying to make a difference for other patients and families. And that although this isn't going to help them at that like specific time, it might help someone else in that really stressful situation have a more positive experience with research and just understand things. So, I mean, that it's pretty neat to be involved in a project where I think that was the primary driving force. And I mean, we had gift cards and remuneration for different individuals involved to try to, it was more so as a thank you for their contributions. But I really do think it was trying to make an impact for future individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, you asked about barriers and facilitators. And in a situation where the co-design, the patients were given the lead at the start, through the whole thing, but at the start, I think that there weren't any barriers, because it was a wide open field. We were pioneers. We were the initiators of something brand new, and that was terribly exciting, exhilarating. There were 5 patient partners at the first meeting. 3 left immediately, and it was down to 2. We couldn't be more different. I'm the one that sees forests and Sandra sees trees, but we needed each other and we understood that. We've become great friends. She comes from Montreal, in a large metropolis. I come from the Great White North. All of the different players involved in the co-design, as I said, we share some common hats and we've got some specialized hats, and together it made for the richest mix of a great project that Heather has already said. It's going to benefit all of the patients, and here's where it's going. I believe Heather's involved still. Srinivas Murthy, the one that's the UBC investigator, principal investigator, he's now working on one that's going to be called Core Consent, and that core consent is that infographic idea now applied to both platform trials and clinical trials universally. So he's working on that project with Dr. Brenda Lucas from Queens. So to see that evolve into something bigger and bigger and help more and more people, I love it. Sign me up. I'm ready to go again.
Thank you so much. Congratulations on that growth. That's amazing. And I did know that Heather was continuing to do some of the consent work as part of her postdoctoral work. So congratulations. Maybe I will just let you know that we do have both an opportunity to stay involved with what's going on with the I always go to say the hub. It's always going to be the hub for me, but transitioning to a Center for Equity-Based Co-Creation, we have a newsletter, and I'll drop the link into the chat. And the other thing I'm dropping in there is a feedback survey. So I did want an opportunity to deeply thank all of our presenters. We know that sharing the challenges of your work and the real messiness of the work is a really vulnerable thing to do, but to have the opportunity to learn from how you overcame some of those challenges and the things you learned along the way, and to really celebrate all of your successes as a community, I think was really, really valuable. So thank you so much to you, Ecom and Shyla and Heather and Kathy, for sharing. And if anybody else wants a last comment or question, please feel free. But otherwise, if you don't mind dropping us a line in the survey about how this event worked for you, and we use that for future planning, we'd be really grateful.
Thanks to all.
Yeah, thank you.